Hey, and welcome to the Intact Beyond Transformation series. I'm Nathan Dale, CEO of Intact Beyond. Thanks very much for joining us. Facilitating today is Nicole, and our subject matter expert is Dr. Sara Pazel from Viva. Dr. Pazel is going to be focusing on neurodiversity. She's going to be looking at things like wellness and well-being, social profiles and processing, explaining what neurodiversity is and how to approach the workplace and roles for diversity. I'll hand over now and I hope you enjoy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Nicole Watson and I'll be facilitating today's deep dive with Sara Pazel from Viva Health at Work. Hi Sara, how are you today?
Hi, I'm great, Nicole. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for asking. Look, it's been such a difficult time for everybody. We've all been forced to work at home. How has this time affected you?
Thanks for asking. The pandemic management times has obviously required an incredible pivot from so many people. And because I help service clients as a consultant, that's required me to pivot to be able to be agile and assist clients with webinar delivery, just like we're doing today, with helping them strategize their graduated return to work team efforts, how they'll plan for the occupancy in their workspace, as well as the design and even the health and wellness support for clients. And then for myself, I've also been juggling the homeschooling and the work. But I have to say, with scarcity, there's always bounty. And I have really appreciated working at a little slower pace and having a little more time with my son at home. And I've been cooking like a frenzied, chef right now.
Reconnecting with those old hobbies and finding that silver lining. And I think that's so key, isn't it? I mean, we have to take the positives of this situation. And hopefully these new habits and new rituals that we're forming, we can continue on, into that next era of work, whatever that may be.
I have a design friend and we're creating a collage, a montage of images, so that there is one side that's basically scarcity, and it's things like the emptiness in the shelves and the warning signs and the lines and the space that's required and the less traffic and the malls and plazas that are empty. And then the other collage is about bounty, and it's exactly that. It's sharing meals, it's playing board games with children, it's looking at extra butterflies that have been here on the Sunshine Coast, it's looking at the beauty of nature. So we're just doing this beautiful contrast. I love it.
Definitely. Fantastic. So what will we be focusing on today, Sara?
Today we're talking about neurodiversity and design, and basically what makes us similar but different, if you will. I'll get my screen. So we're going to be talking about neurodiversity, how we make sense of our sensory world and why we may act as we do. It's like, why does one person in a room click their pen incessantly or tap their knee under the desk? Why is it at home one of our partners might be able to handle the television on, the radio on, and have their laptop open and do work, whereas the other person is like holding their hands to the ears and asking to shut this all down, and they need the quiet. So
definitely me.
I think it's a fabulous way to look at almost what we would think of traditional personality profiles, but in fact there's some fundamental science and neurological basis for this. And so for me, it's really fascinating. I think it would be a great dating app as much as it is a strategy for good work design and household management. So we'll chat a little bit about this. We're going to be looking at wellness, well-being, and wholeness, how we process our senses and what this means, how this affects our worldview and our behaviors, look at a case study, and then talk a little bit about design strategies, but also personal strategies, just to help regulate the neural system. So let me explain this slide a little. Oftentimes in the workplace, we talk about worker health or workplace well-being, and there's terms that are used interchangeably, but I love the research of Charlie Grantham, and he talks about these three terms: wellness, well-being, and wholeness. So wellness might be symbolized by the hand, and wellness relates to what we might traditionally think of workplace wellness strategies, things like the pedometer and how many steps are we taking, and do we have the basket of fruit available for some good nutrition. And the measurements might be our heart rate, our blood pressure, our glucose levels, blood sugar levels. Again, the way that it's expressed almost in a physical engagement in the world. And typically the concern in the workplace is that the people who already have an interest in health and wellness ascribe to those programs and are the first ones to sign up. So we're always trying to look at other ways to engage people who otherwise might naturally gravitate toward those activities and programs. And then we have the concept of well-being, which is symbolized by the heart. And well-being tends to relate to our personal affect and our personal relations, what they call the workplace climate, how we're getting along with people. Oftentimes you ask, have you had a good day at work? And it's defined by the relationships, the transactions that have occurred in our relationships. The measurements may still have some overlap. It could still be your blood pressure and your heart rate, because stress can be expressed in a physical way. But it's also might be the climate surveys that you've taken at the workplace, your levels of engagement, your interest in the workplace, and some of the productivity outcomes. But this other concept of wholeness, I love this. This whole concept of wholeness is symbolized by the brain. And the concept of wholeness is whether or not our design of work, the job demands, the autonomy, the control that we have, the say-so that we have, the authority, the achievement, sense of achievement is being well met. It means, are we inspired? Is there meaning in our work? Is it creative if we need creativity? Is it fulfilling? Does it align with our values, the actions that we are undertaking? And pretty much oftentimes, no matter what the physical tasks are, is do we have a voice in our workplace? And the very interesting thing about wholeness is that it's okay to temporarily take yourself out of what would be a traditional measure of wellness. So we might be working on a project together with Intact Group, for example, and it might require full force, full steam ahead. We may be working late nights and early mornings, but there's an end goal in sight. We might be doing the late night pizza, so our nutritional intake might not be, what we would normally describe as our wellness strategy that's well balanced. So temporarily, we might take ourselves out of this concept of wellness, and we might not be sleeping that well, but we're excited, we're inspired, we're working hard towards something that we value. Our neural system is on edge achieving this. It's okay temporarily, as long as we have the skill set, the resource, the structure in the workplace to then regulate and take breaks again and get back to the system of wellness. So it's the one time where being out of balance may have a bigger picture in mind, the forest versus the trees. So I like this concept because it still talks about inspiration and meaning in life, yeah? And we can think about design and project manage it that way, as long as we're not always staying in that overexcited state that will fatigue and exhaust our neural system. I bring this up because we are talking basically about the neural system and how to have this mostly regulated, and it can be done through design and personal strategies. So when we talk a little bit about mindfulness, there is this concept of the spinning top, or being very present. And mindfulness, we think of being still, but in fact, stillness is dynamic. If you've heard of the term homeostasis, where your body regulates neurochemical facilities in the body, systems in the body, allostasis is that interaction of multiple homeostatic effects, so that there are constant chemical reactions, neural reactions, circulatory effects happening in the body, and we're well regulated. That spinning top is spinning still, but it's erect, and you see the colors flying like a rainbow, and it's in balance. So when it is off balance, that's when it's wobbly, topples over, etc. You're finding that multiple interacting homeostatic effects are not operating well. The allostasis. So when we're not mindful and fully present and wholeheartedly engaged, you might be distracted, less engaged, uninvolved, low in energy, lacking vitality, enthusiasm, suffering, because you're always imagining some different destiny or a different reality. So this really does talk about the fundamentals of how we process first our sensory world, how we make sense of it, and then how we act and react. And when we're talking about sensory processing, there tends to be these 5 external senses that we're most familiar with: the concept of touch, the concept of sight and taste, flavors, aromas, smells, scents, also our activity, our movement, and acoustics, our hearing, right? These are things that we tend to be aware of, with the 5 senses, the external being this touch, sight, taste, smell, and hearing. We think about these internal senses, this activity and moving, as proprioception, our sense of position, our balance, knowing where our joint is in relation to the joint capsule, knowing our sense of balance and movement patterns. So our kinesthetic awareness, these are more our internal senses. And what we have to do with this is protect ourselves. We have to be alerted by potentially harmful stimulation. And then we need to discriminate so we know what's the most effective way to act. Because at any given time, we have a neural system that is firing thousands of little sensations at us, and our body and our mind has learned to discriminate and pay attention to those that are most essential to our ability to thrive and to be well and to be safe. Yeah. So effectively, when you're thinking about the neural system, you hear this concept of having our central nervous system, our brain, or our spinal cord, and our somatic nervous system, or the nerves that go out to our body. And then we have this idea of our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, or our autonomic nervous system. And this is what you're always looking at for allostasis, for your concept of regulation. So your fight or flight response is what we often think about in physical work, where there may be something to get aggressive about or something to feel anxiety about. Yeah, stress, the stimulation, sympathetic nerves. And there are different functions that happen. Now, never is one just completely shut off and the other one's completely working. It's a constant balance of those interacting homeostatic effects or allostasis effects. But when you have a more dominant parasympathetic response, this is when you can rest. This is when you digest. This is when you have a little clearer thought. It might be well regulated. Your heartbeat may be a little slower. The parasympathetic nervous system has functions to work where your somatic, your body system, is slowing down so that you can focus on your organ system, your digestive system. So this constant regulation is important if you're going to regulate your senses, if you're going to function well, if you're going to not have chronic adrenal gland releases and be in chronic stress, which can cause a number of things, such as weight gain or underweight. It can cause high blood sugars, so the type 2 diabetic conditions. It can create cardiovascular diseases. It can be accountable toward metabolic ill health, cancers. Can relate to basically early fatality is what we think about when this is not well regulated, right? Hair loss. We have problems with nails, taste, actions that we take, behaviors that we take hereafter, impulsive shopping, maybe infidelity, things that can get us in trouble when our nervous system is not well regulated. We're always looking for a quick fix, poor diet, poor nutrition. So it's both a health condition and a behavioral sponsor condition that we need to regulate. And the human experience is quite challenging. We take in information. There could be a trigger, an event. It might be a symbolism of a person where we have some transference, something that we relate to, or a thing in our world. And it relates to our, what we call a throughput system, our beliefs, our thoughts, what we've observed, our past experiences, and therefore our values and judgment. And then we have an emotional response, right? So if we can regulate the self, or if we can design an environment where we are more naturally regulated, where we can seek the type of regulation that our neural system needs, we're more likely to be a little calmer. We're more likely to make decisions that align with our values and take actions that seems sensible to us, that we can be satisfied by the actions that we've taken and therefore have less suffering. All right, it's a term we talk about in yoga, sadhu, and so it shall be, and to release dukkha, or suffering in our life, because our actions have aligned with values. We can accept the consequences. And therefore also neurologically, we're far more balanced. We're less likely to have this chronic adrenal gland release. We have to do a lot of information with all those senses that we've take in. We have to attend to the senses, right? We have to be able to be attentive in order to have any form of perception. And then we start to classify the senses and the experiences with past experiences, and have to have a way to discriminate or associate and group, because that creates neurological efficiency where we recall past events. Then we start to plan our action. Do we need to react or not? Maybe we don't. And then we do a performance, some sort of action. So again, the neural system well regulated means that this model from perception to recall, planning, and performance seems to be well thought out, seems to be well regulated, seems to be sensible and logical, right? Ideally, we want this sense of Goldilocks, right? Not baby bear, mama bear, or papa bear chair. It's the just right conditions in our life. We want our design of our workplace, our physical environment, our urban environment, as well as our relationships, to be at the just right degree of challenge, where we are inspired, where we feel like we can thrive, we're engaged, we can have creativity, we can learn. But too much inspiration, too much demand of our cognitive world, and we crash. Too little inspiration, too little stimulus, and again, we're not inspired, we disengage. So it's what we typically think of this performance curve, or this stress curve, Yerkes-Dodson law. Are we in a positive point of stress, what's called eustress, or are we pushed to the point of fatigue, exhaustion, poor health, breakdown, and eventually burnout, distress, where we can't act? We might be calm, but we may be bored on the other side too. So we need to constantly have this regulation, this allostasis in both our design of what we choose to do in our life, the design of the environment, just to basically satisfy that primal neural needs. Here's another graphic for you about the theory. We'll get into some case studies soon. But this lower little curve is the constant regulation, the allostasis, or the homeostasis that's happening in the neural system. It's where we feel we can be agile, we can cope with change quite readily because we're energized, we're feeling relatively stable, where it's easy to adapt. We feel flexible, which is oftentimes needed in a workplace with so much change. And look what we've all had to cope with recently with pandemic management. So if we were already in a state of positivity, of optimism, we might have made that pivot quickly. We might have gone from what we were talking about earlier, from the fear about scarcity, to finding the benefit of bounty, finding all the good that's occurring associated with the change. We're well regulated. The vagus nerve, which affects in the upper abdominal wall, this point of anxiety, seems relaxed and regulated. But when this is overexcited, if we already have what I call trait anxiety, if we have a neural system that's already firing, ready to be set off, then we get into state anxiety. And state anxiety is this red zone, this, okay, I can do it, I can do it, I can achieve, I'm not setting my boundaries, I'm saying yes to everything. It might be somebody you wouldn't expect to be in this state because they always seem like they just perform so well. They're a high achiever, right? They're getting the best of the grades, they're winning their triathlon sport. They also, balance really well with all the yoga activity, whatever it is. You think that their life seems like perfection, but in fact, they may be in this extra state of stimulation that might not be sustainable, right? So it's the I can do it, or I can fight this, I'm going to take this on, I'm going to choose to battle this, I've got my rage, my anger, I'm going to place it somewhere. The other side of that is anxiety, fear, concern, and you don't always know what's beneath the surface, like an iceberg. Some people seem to convey this sense of calm, but you don't know what's underneath the surface without further investigation. But the risk of always being in this sympathetic nervous system over anxiety of the autonomic nervous system is that you get to this point of breakdown, of burnout, of I just can't do anything again. I don't care. I'm not engaged. Stuff it. I can't do it. I'm immobilized. I'm frozen. And this is what they call from the dorsal vagal response. So there are neurological responses. And how do you know when we're well regulated? When is it actually a problem? Well, when a behavior is so frequently noticed by anyone outside, and I guess basic social expectations, when it's so intense or extreme, like you're yelling at your workmates or your household, when the duration of the behavior just continues and won't regulate quickly. So basic concept of, is there a problem? Well, what are you noticing with yourself being overexcited, overstressed, over anxious, or over angry? And what are other people around you noticing too? So another concept theoretically, before we get into case studies, is just this concept that I like to think about for design. It's person, environment, occupation, and performance. And for me, from a background in human factors, human-centered design, ergonomics, this makes a great sense. What are we doing to help a person be well-regulated, have some meaning in life? The design of their occupation, the job demands control, autonomy, and support. What's their urban environment and their built environment like to allow them to thrive? And how are they performing? In other words, are the jobs well matched to what they can do? And are they at the pace and level of complexity that's that Goldilocks just right degree of challenge? Right? So it's a model that informs a lot of occupational science. So I'm going to take you into an industry case study, and we'll talk a little bit about a tool, a psychometric tool that's been tested for validity and reliability with 950 participants in the final iteration of this survey. And it has come up with I guess a quadrant mapping of your neurological threshold or your tolerances to stimuli, as well as your ability to respond in either passive manners or active manners. So I'm going to explain this quadrant for you. This is sort of a quadrant graphic, a mapping tool. And health scientists, health practitioners might use the adolescent and adult sensory profile to determine how you make sense of your sensory world and then help develop strategies. You may be sensory sensitive, which means something irritates you, but you only notice after the effect, or you may actively work with a low threshold for sensory avoiding. You may have a low registration, which means that you have a high threshold. And in the concept of auditory, for example, registration, it may mean that you're a person in this upper left quadrant where you're hearing a lot of noise all around you. You can't discriminate the one that matters at the time. And somebody's calling your name, saying, Sarah, Sarah, hey, Sarah, hey, Sarah, shouts it out before I suddenly turn around and look up and go, oh, sorry, did you need me, right? That would be somebody with an extremely low registration, a double negative almost, or a difficulty with discrimination is the way I like to think about it. Those who are actively sensory seeking, if they're really high on that quadrant, then they're the ones who are constantly looking for stimulation. They want to go to the plaza, they want to go to the concert, they're tapping their knee underneath the table or clicking their pen. Those people who don't seem to slow down, they've done 100 activities and they get home and say, where are we going next, right? You need that stimulation. And that can be fatiguing for others, for their neural system, right? So we have to work out ways that we can fulfill that and balance and then be receptive to others with whom we wish to have a relationship. So the sensory profile maps this out in different quadrants, yeah? I'll talk about it in detail in a couple of images, but I think that this, to me, makes the most sense. And there's this beautiful little YouTube in this link that you can look at a child's perspective of sensory profiles, yeah? You often hear about children having attentional deficit or hyperactivity disorder, sensory profile challenges, but we stop to think about, well, what happens when they become adolescents or adults, right? What happens in that regard? Well, typically it doesn't just stop. We do learn strategies to modulate or regulate, and we don't necessarily have to have a disability. I do these AASP surveys with students at university, And I usually find if I have a group of 30 or in a tutorial that at least half will have some sense that registers outside of the norm on that quadrant, right? So I'll explain the quadrants again in a little detail, but this little concept of little cup and big cup to me is great. If your sensory threshold is very low, you have a low threshold, which means you have a higher likelihood to experience some form of anxiety and stress. Trait anxiety to put you into state anxiety. You have a low espresso cup. A low threshold is this little tiny espresso cup. So if you fill it up with a sense type, and it doesn't mean every sense type, it could be different for each individual, but maybe too much noise is filling that cup real fast, right? So you need less noise to fill your cup. It could be too much touch. And this also has cultural trends. Americans touch, we hug, we put hands on, and that might be a little too much for somebody with a lower threshold for their touch sensation, that need for personal space, for example. So it really helps me to think about this little cup, big cup, where somebody with a high threshold has a big coffee mug, a big cup. It means that they need a lot of stimulation. So Nicole, you just indicated to me that you need a lot of activity. You want to go, 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 go. You're, sales alpha, don't stop. So you need lots of stimulation put into your cup before you're feeling like it's pretty full and satisfying, right?
Can you be both though? Because I feel like, yes, I do need stimulation and I'm always on the go. My mind goes a million miles an hour and I do 100 things at once.
Yes.
But then on the other end of the scale, if I'm trying to get my head, in a document, in a game, for example, if I'm writing a tender, if my partner so much as breathes too loudly, I'm like
stop.
Looking at him, like, yeah, exactly. So I kind of feel that I've got both. I can get very distracted. Sometimes I don't complete a task. I do multiple tasks, and I need to get myself back in that game to complete them. But
100%. So yes, if I go back to this quadrant picture, you may be low registration with auditory stimulation, for example. You may be sensory seeking for activity and movement, but you might be sensory avoiding for light, for example. If too much bright glare affects you, you might be sensory avoiding for taste or flavors or smells or aromas. So at any point, you may have different senses at different degrees of these quadrants. When we look at the measurement on that AASP tool, that 60-item questionnaire survey that is separated into those types of senses that we spoke about, the taste, the smell, the hearing, the vision, the touch, the activity, those types of senses, there is a scoring system. And if you are very much like most people, you're roughly between that 16 and 84%, which is still a really broad range. If you're extremely outside of that range, you may be 0 to 2%. Extremely sensory avoiding or very low in sensory avoiding, where you don't care at all, that 0 to 2%, or the 98 to 100% of, like most people in that research study design. And in between is that from 2 to 16%, much more than most people or much less than most people. So we do rate it, and you would be to a degree of sensitivity, and different senses may have different cups, if you will, little cups or big cups. And even if you're a big cup person, it can get too full. So even if you're a big cup person and you've gone to outdoor music concerts and you've not been sleeping for 3 days, and you have been having all your friends visit from the UK, and you've been on go, 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 your cup can still get too full and needing retreat, right? It's never, there's no hole at the bottom. It does get full. It needs to recharge.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. And as you're all kind of talking about it, I'm thinking about, retracing my steps over the last few weeks, and everything you're saying is very apparent in my life.
So, and what's coming up is because we've had a sudden pivot in work changes and lifestyle changes, we haven't been able to partake in our routine habits and routines. So all of this stuff is going to be challenged right now in different ways for people. So usually when I'm talking about it now during pandemic management, it's making a lot of sense because we've just had the rug pulled out from underneath us and had to change the way we live a little bit. So we haven't automatically been able to accommodate our neurological needs, perhaps. You may be suddenly working with somebody at home that you don't spend that much time with typically, or children underneath your feet, or you may want the stimulation and you're restricted and confined. So that's not being met for you. You have to find routines to still get some level of stimulation. So we'll talk about sort of the individual strategies, just an overview, but first let's just go back to understanding the basics. If you have a low registration, that's a high neurological threshold for stimulation, you might have a self-management response that's passive because you don't know that it's a problem until somebody else raises it. For you, it's your normal, right? You might miss sensory information. So if touch or activity and movement was low on your threshold, you might be one of those clumsy people that trips a lot, right? So if visual stimulation is a low registration for you, you may be the person that always misses the street signs, never takes it in, and gets lost frequently without the GPS guiding you every single time, even though you've been somewhere again and again. So it means your discrimination to take in senses from the neurological world is such that you're not discriminating the most important information amongst the other sensory stimuli. You need a greater intensity of input. You need the flashing light. So you need somebody tapping you while they call your name, whatever that is. If you're seeking senses, you have a high threshold or a big coffee cup, and you're actively trying to manage these needs. So you're continually adding sensory input. You might be the one that, if your vestibular system and activity and movement, you might be the one that loves doing somersaults and handstands and cartwheels. You always need to be busy, hence the multitasking. You're really curious, you're really inspired, engaged, uber, doing lots of study and work, and you need input to be built into your daily routines and activities all the time. So being at home might be this radical shift for someone like you. I'm talking about the really high levels on sensory seeking. If you rate high on these threshold quadrants that are lower thresholds, in other words, you're very sensitive to senses or you very much want to avoid, you're looking at the passive response or the active response. So if you have a low neurological threshold and you're sensory sensitive, you might be continually detecting sensory input. So too much all the time is just fatiguing for you. You might be really aware of that subtle touch on your arm and extremely vigilant to detail. You need your environment to be shut down. You need it less stimulated. You need the light stim. You need the noise off. If you're really high in sensory avoiding, it's also a low threshold, but you actively are doing things like you are withdrawing and purposely finding solo space. You really need rigid routine and structure. You're always the one that can be relied upon to stick to the plan, but you'll have difficulty if the plan changes, and you really have to choose your battles of what to engage with. So now, going back to this quadrant, let's go to a case study. I was asked to come and have a look at the first query came through, can we please have a look at the auditory stimulation in our office? Now, normally, as a human factors and ergonomics specialist, I'll go in and look at tasks, job design, role, environmental design, and I'm looking at cohorts of people to fit groups of people, job roles, tasks that are achieved, customer experience, user experience. But when I drilled down to the question, and I said, sure, I can look at some auditory screening. There's also specialists in occupational hygiene that I can pull in for this, but why? What's the problem? Drill down, and it's actually because they're having a challenge with an individual in the workplace. They've got valuable skills in computer programming, but they're having basic meltdowns. And they didn't know if it's a work health safety issue because the person's complaining about noise, or is it an industrial relations workforce strategy issue, human resource issue, because this person is just screaming out of the blue and they don't understand what's the the trigger for this. So they didn't actually really know where to go with this. And I said, okay, if it's happening for an individual, let's do some basic screening. We can certainly do this, but let's also do the sensory profile and try and get an idea of mapping of how this person's interpreting their sensory world through their neural system. And the issue was about acoustics initially, but the person had already had audiometric screening and their ears were working just fine, right? There was no organ issue, if you will, no functional issue with hearing. When we did the sensory profile, this is how their profile looked. They had a very low registration or more than most people, for hearing, particularly acoustics. Sensory seeking was extremely, much less than most people, that 0 to 2%. And it was things like visual stimulation, hearing, and touch. They were not seeking that. And conversely, down the bottom, they were actively avoiding sensation, touch, visual stimulation in this regard, and too much acoustics. And they were sensitive equally in that quadrant, much more, that top 2%. So this is a pretty extreme profile for somebody, not all senses, but those main ones, right? And this person would work in an open plan area, and there were stand-up team meetings, but suddenly they would just yell out, "Stop, shut up." You know, what they said to me was, "Look, I'm having a hard time even listening to my neighbor scrape their yogurt cup. It is driving me crazy." They wore special clothing because even the sleeve of their clothing was challenging. And when Workforce Strategy wanted to just put earphones, noise canceling earmuffs, they didn't like the touch of that, but they didn't understand why. For them, it was normal. They couldn't understand, like, doesn't everybody get annoyed with headphones on, you know? And the light, they always had to have the blinds down, right? So there was a few things happening that to me meant, well, it's something neurological. And they would often work solo, but it was funny. They'd go and find themselves in a room where there were, gaming technology. So pings, pongs, et cetera, from computers and slot machines and this kind of thing happening all the time. But that was less bothersome to them than all the humans in the room, right? They were constantly hearing all the noise coming at them at all the time and could not discriminate what was happening. So we did, instead of having to do something that was too scientific, we just did some basic screening in addition to that sensory profile. So I looked at the basic noise, and I could call in an acoustic specialist if I needed to, but I just used an app. And so there are simple apps, free apps that you can use just to look at the decibels of the acoustics that are occurring and what you're looking for. In a quiet space, you're typically looking for this sort of 40 to 45 decibels, but it was fair enough. It was a little bit over, and in that open plan space, it was between 50 and 70 at any given time. We also look at a privacy index, which is how many words can you hear in an audible in a room when you're trying to work with some sort of confidentiality. Your neighbors, what are you hearing nearby? Yeah, and if you can basically hear more than this 15% of this audible, intelligible spoken word, that can be quite distracting. So typically we can discriminate when there's a few random words spoken in the background. But if we're hearing out of 100 words, more than 15 of those, and you're really hearing the thread of the content of conversation, that can distract you from what you're doing. For most people with a well-regulated neural system, if you're sensitive, even that 10 to 15% may be just too much for you, right? And so we went down to what they called their private quiet space rooms. And I literally walked into another room and read out passages, and he would write down anytime he could hear those words. And it was he could hear more than 15 of my words. So it would have been distracting even in what was the designed quiet rooms. The other thing was down the hall from these quiet rooms was a social center and billiards table. So the concept of having a quiet room and a social center together probably wasn't the best design strategy. You were exceeding what we would call this privacy index, right? So it's some very simple tests that you can be doing in your own workplace to see if we're meeting this for most people's basic needs, right? And then we start to go, okay, well, what's the design strategy? For him as an individual, we were able to tell the workplace that instead of having these stand-up meetings with a lot of spoken word, this person would respond better to written messages. It responds much better to written instruction. And giving this person time and space, taking them into a quiet room for one-on-one conversation was better than team meetings, even though it's understood that sometimes team collaboration is needed. You might also be looking at design strategies in the business for the whole of the business, because the noise was a little elevated, how to absorb, block, or cover the noise, where you may have white noise, soft music, you may have absorbency, ceiling tiles and barriers, you may have the right carpeting. There are acoustic specialists that we can refer to once we understand what the nature of the problem is, and you'll hear this with really good interior designers. And we're always looking at this for good work design. We're always looking at how do you engage people and design for diversity, study the tasks, the jobs they have to do, solve problems, but also always look for more opportunity in good design. It's an ongoing continuous quality improvement, optimize and improve performance. So always looking at opportunities in addition to some of the problems that occur. And this is just an example of, some of the acoustic strategies that can be done in design that looks positive, but there's actually a functional effect of sound absorbency, right? Cool look and good sound absorbency. So we're thinking always about whether it's home space design because of the pandemic management or workspace design. Is there somewhere where those people who need to at that time or for their neurological profile, do they have some solo focused thinking space? Do they have somewhere that they can go to collaborate that will not interrupt those solo thinkers? Is there something that can feed and fuel the need for movement, activity, and touch, drive areas? And can you recharge, relax, and just retreat? Do you also have somewhere to socially engage, converge, meet and greet, right? So I'm always looking at how's the business or how's the design strategy providing for this? So you can accommodate most people in design for diversity. I was fortunate to have a look at the Medibank Private Docklands workplace design, which is flagship in Australia, and use this for part of a chapter that I wrote in an ergonomics book about health and well-being. And so from this agile work design strategy where they had a docking station and their own private lockers, the workers could choose where to attend. And there was efficiency of bringing 6 work buildings into one building. It's quite a design strategy with multiple architects involved and interior designers. You see on the left the central staircase, so those for activity and movement were well serviced, and the workers in this workspace took 6,000 more steps than those who were in the other buildings, right? So you really did meet metabolic needs for low impact physical activity. But I think it's important when we're talking about pandemic management too, to realize that movement and activity is good for keeping our immunity up, boosting our immunity. At the same time, we have to regulate that too much movement can relate to cross exposure. So you need movement and space. It's going to be a really interesting times in workplace design now. But movement typically has simply been focused on the cumulative disease of chronic health and health management. There's still a concept of keeping our immunity boosted by being active. There was shared social space to have a kitchen where you could converge, and there were a lot of plants everywhere with fresh basil and oregano and parsley to use for your own salads and making your own healthful meals, yeah? There were spaces that you could work as a team, these very funky cafe spaces and spaces where you could just socialize, retreat, and use the little ping pong tables. Spaces where you could retreat, looks like a ski lodge to me, and then the busy cityscape, but with sound absorbency to have little pockets of a little more privacy in your work zone, and of course some solo space to concentrate. And the workers in this space said, look, I am more collaborative, I'm more connected, I feel healthier, more productive, and a 5% reduction in call center absenteeism. So that's so vital. So what are we going to do? We have to think about individual and design strategies. I'll give you a very quick overview. If you've done a sensory profile assessment, and that's what I'm getting asked to do now in businesses, I'm getting asked to go ahead and conduct individual assessments, look at stereotypes and trends, which you may find among workforce cohorts, like the accountants versus the lawyers versus the creatives in design, may have different trends in their sensory profile, which is why they might be attracted to a career in the first place. So how are we going to design for individuals and teams? And how are we going to look at also individual strategies? So the whole environmental design, team strategies, job design, job creation, and individual health and well-being. Recap: if you have low registration, right, a very high threshold, a lot of neurological stimulation, or a big coffee cup, you might need, if it's taste, you might need meals with lots of flavor, texture. If it's movement, you might need a lot of resistance and strength training, and PNF is proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or hold, contract, and relax in your exercise prescription. You may be the person who really has to have a clear path so you don't trip and fall. You may be the person who needs a lot of visual cue and stimuli, bold signage, you know, so that you have your pathways, your pathfinding methods, tactile, lots of texture added to objects, and you may need things really clear and without distractions to understand different stimuli for the verbal stimuli, or need more written signage. If you're very high in sensory seeking, you might need things to, you know, for oral sensation, chew the gums, use the mints, use the cinnamon flavors. You might be always seeking this new, you might need to incorporate movement. You might have to do physical activity before you're going to sit and concentrate at your computer. So I'm finding for people who are working from home that are high sensory seeking, if they haven't gone for their run, done some push-ups and done their walk, they're not really feeling very productive at their computer, right? So you need lots of intervals of that. You need to choose activity where you may have touch. It might be social, could be dancing, massage, or you might actually need the background music with music if acoustics was high. So again, it depends on sense type and quadrant profile, right? I'm just giving an overview of some basic strategies with different sense types, just to get a flavor of it. If you were very sensitive to senses, you might have to identify which flavors and aromas work for you and stick with those mostly. Like even if there's an aromatherapy scent that works for you, have it in a few places where you need to concentrate. You might need to, you still want to challenge yourself. You want to regulate and modulate and train the neural system so you can gradually introduce the exposure to new senses, new foods, new activities, but then always have retreat time scheduled in. You might be the one who needs to calm yourself down with a hammock or a rocking chair. You might need movement. Your sport might be cycling so that you're consistent and upright as opposed to aerobic dance, right? You may be the soloist. You might like deep pressure. You may need the heavy blankets to rest and retreat, and lots of breaks, timeouts. If you're extremely avoidance in behaviors for sensations, you want to always ask for your sauces on the side. You want unscented, low fragrance, if it's scent or aroma. You might need stairs versus the motion sensation of elevators and escalators. So businesses always have to think about this. You may be the person at work that really needs routine, structure, clarity, transparency, so things are not suddenly a change for you. You might be the person that wants the darkest part of the room, dim lights. You have to take lots of breaks to close your eyes, get away from the computer. You don't like the fans, the vents, the air conditioning. You may be the one that's complaining about it. White noise or calming sounds may be what you need in the background, and you may need to actually have lots of retreat space. You're not in those busy, congested social areas. Yeah. So it can get complex, but really interesting to me. And I just think as long as we're thinking about design for diversity, both our physical needs, our neurological needs, then we're typically also accommodating other aspects like gender, age, and cultural diversity by designing for this. Let's conclude in this section now thinking just about the individual, thinking about this science of what you can do individually. If you can't immediately change the design of your workplace, what will you do for yourself? And the concept of free will is connected to breath. So feeling empowerment can be connected to your breath. We will focus on some breath techniques, but there has been science linking decision making to our exhales. So I think this is really important, because if you think about having short, shallow, sharp breathing that's clavicular up high, neurologically, you're likely to be agitated or in that state of anxiety or anger. You're not having a slow, regulated breath. You can use that for feedback to say, I know I'll make better decisions if I can have a long, slow, regulated breath. And simply taking a pause before acting can be really important for an individual strategy to cope with the consequences. So you are actively getting some biofeedback, neurologically trying to regulate. And it may be something as simple as this 3-part diaphragmatic breathing, learning how to breathe deep, low into your lowest part of your abdomen. All right. So again, if you can't control everything else that's in the design of your world, maybe there's some strategies that you can do to affect yourself. To regulate your personal neural system, breathing is what we often associate with an unconscious function. We make it conscious. We make it conscious because we know that our decision-making is linked to our exhales. So therefore, if we improve our breathing, we can improve our decision-making. Of course, we know it also regulates our autonomic nervous system and invokes an autonomic nervous system for calm, which is good for organ health and brain health, right? So 3-part diaphragmatic breathing is putting your hands deep on your low belly and learning how to have a rotund low belly, having a Buddha belly breath, a Santa Claus belly breath, a pregnant belly breath, not just distending your belly and jutting it out, pushing it out, but learning to fill that space with a low belly. And you can compare that by putting your hands in the middle of the abdomen and having a mid-abdominal breath versus hands up high onto the clavicle or the upper chest, and learning how to bring that breath back down to low abdominal breath. Low abdominal, deep diaphragmatic breath helps regulate the neural system and evoke that autonomic nervous system parasympathetic response for rest and relaxation. So if you're feeling too agitated, that's a quick strategy. And Nicole, I'll give you a handout to help instruct people in this as well. The other aspect of a quick individual strategy is to understand what is known as the cortical homunculus, right? Throwing a lot of terms at you, but it's something to understand that the way we communicate with our hands and our lips, our mouth, take up a lot of brain space, a lot of neural space. So what you're looking at on the left is a sort of clay structure of a person symbolized by how much the brain pays attention to. Hands are really big, lips and eyes are pretty big as well, right? So the brain is using a lot of information in the sensory world and the motor expression world, and it regulates itself based on how you use hands and how you communicate. And it's very important to think about the strategy. The brain picture on the right is what's called a homunculus, or a map of the brain, showing different regions of the brain. That's just a slice up and down in the brain. And you're looking at this frontal view. You're looking at how much the space thinks about the hand. The hand is symbolized really big, and also the lips, particularly a little bit in the eyes, the sensory world, how much information the brain ascribes, how much neural activity it gives to the symbolism in our external world, right? So I share that with you so you can think about basic yoga hand postures. If you're fisted and clenched, you're more likely to have an elevated blood pressure, a higher heart rate. You're more likely to feel this state anxiety and feel aggression. If palms are open and deep down low near the lowest part of your abdomen for a deep breath, you're more likely to invoke that parasympathetic nervous system, autonomic nervous system, that rest and relaxation. And there are strategies you can do that you can learn through basic yoga science to immediately give you that sense of calm. So designing your own self versus the external environment. I'll highlight a couple. The top right corner, Jnana Mudra, the OK sign upside down or to the side. You put that deep low in your abdomen, and that gives you a very long, low, very long vertical breath, very long vertical breath. The minute you flip the hand palms over, you suddenly get a low and rotund low belly breath. So if you're having a hard time feeling that abdominal breath, you simply change the hand posture. Why? Because hands consume a lot of neural cerebral activity, neural response. You're going to get an immediate body response and an immediate nerve response, right? To something that otherwise is unconscious, our breath. We use it with cardiorespiratory patients to get them to open up chambers of their lung. We may block one side with a fist and open one side with a flat palm, and you'll feel that lung chamber open while you breathe. Nasal inhale and exhale, do the same. And you can learn then how to shift breathing and regions of respiratory muscles and functions so that you can become incredibly aware. It becomes something you can do immediately standing in the line at the grocery store. When you get used to doing this, it becomes a habit. The other aspect for personal regulation, if you have to find, it's just those fundamentals of this base model. Are you doing body care? Are you got good sleep hygiene, good nutrition, good hydration, lots of water, good exercise? Are you doing cleansing and restful meditation? Are you feeling like you're achieving? So breaking down things that matter to you and choosing to engage in activities that are meaningful to you and not sacrificing those activities. It could be the cooking, it could be the music, the gardening, whatever is useful, meaningful to you. Are you connecting? Are you making sure that you're connecting socially with others who bring you joy? And are you doing other fun things, whatever your hobbies are? And all of this requires balanced time, nothing in excess, because you don't want to feel like you do too much social connection and enjoyment and you forget to achieve, for example, right? So it's all about this level of personal balance. So what do we do with this? We have been talking about neurological efficiencies, sensory processing, our sensory types, and how it can inform design of both the external environment, the way our jobs or our tasks are designed, and way teams can be mobilized for performance, and how individuals can look after themselves. A huge catechism of design for the health and well-being of individuals and teams. So we want to consider this. We can have empathy now with individuals, teams, or families with their funny, nuanced behaviors, because we might understand that it relates to their neurological needs, their needs to regulate neurologically. It can help slow us down with judgment, bring more empathy to the situation. You might want to conduct an assessment. I'm being asked all the time now to conduct these assessments for individuals and look at team trends, and then help design the strategy for the way the job role is designed, the technology enhancement and interface with technology, the built environment and the urban environment. You may want to then build this into design for big teams, for the agile work design to accommodate sensory needs at a large scale level, work with architects and designers and give them this information to inform their design. And you can use this for even best education strategies, or go back to learn personal individual management strategies when you can't affect the whole rest of the world all at once. If you dream it, you can design it. And first you need to be informed and have some of that information. Again, this relates to wellness, well-being, and wholeness. What gives us inspiration and meaning? And I think hopefully the case studies have been useful to bring some of the theory back into the practice of what you really do with this information for a call to action. Hope that this is of interest to you, and I look forward to some of the questions I might receive.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, I have a genuine interest in this subject. I'm from a HR recruitment change management.
Yeah, there you go.
I've been working with clients for a number of years, mainly on two subjects. One is the employer value proposition and how that links to the customer value proposition. And the other area is diversity and inclusion.
Fantastic.
I feel that this presentation has pretty much pulled both of those areas together and looked at that in terms of the science behind it, how to increase productivity, how to look at that from a design perspective. So I've been talking to property clients about this for a number of years. And
excellent.
I feel that this particular program and deep dive will be a huge benefit to a lot of clients that I deal with. I've done hundreds, or well, not hundreds, but I've done heaps of psychometric tests before.
Oh, fantastic.
I find them really interesting. I love to learn about myself and also develop, but what I find is generally missed is you kind of complete something and you generally sit down with, you know, an org site, but they don't really run through the actual science behind it. And it's almost seen as a one size fits all. And that's why earlier on I asked you that question of, well, okay, can you be both? And it's never been explained to me previously in terms of looking at all of your different senses. And you know how you can be on one end of the scale for one and maybe so not, you know, not so much for the other. So I feel that this has been extremely beneficial for me personally.
Excellent.
I would love to learn more, and I would love to actually take the test myself.
Yes.
How do people get in touch with you?
Sure. So they can call me. Phone number 0421 824 644. The company is Viva Health at Work. And we'll have our website and email info@vivahealthgroup.com.au. So you can certainly write to us and find out more information. You can see perhaps, Nicole, why you might be attracted to different people in your life too, because they either are compatible and can do the things you like to do, or maybe they regulate and settle you down. So that whole contrast of the people you gravitate toward in your life might be related to this neurological sensory profile.
Definitely. As I said, I just think it's really, really interesting. So look, also you can get in touch with Sara via our Intact Beyond website on our experts page. Please feel free to reach out direct as well. Any questions either come through to myself or Sara direct. Thank you so much for your time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, you know, how you see the workplace and the working community transforming beyond this period.
Yeah, look, fantastic. I think what's happened through this pandemic management is there has been a sudden, even increasingly a level of attention and interest in health and well-being. So we've been looking at, obviously, there's the safety of pandemic management and infection control that is paramount. But with this, we've been learning we really have to focus on health, well-being, and engagement, because we understand that this need to accommodate a workplace and all of their diverse needs will affect our business bottom line. If you want to purely look at it from the, you know, price elasticity of supply and demand, when we're providing a workplace that is accommodating diversity, we are going to attract the very best person, and we are going to be able to draw upon that diversity to have the most innovative workplace. So I'm finding the questions I'm getting are right. How are we going to graduate? Like I said, short term, this return to work, but how are we going to make sure that we have an ongoing safe climate for work, where people emotionally feel safe, where they feel that they're important in our organization, where they're protected and their health is promoted? And how are we going to then make sure that that's part of the whole culture, which means even embedding this into our performance indicators and making sure our C-suite is really well informed, that our board understands these priorities. So I do believe the world of work will be looking at this so much more significantly for what we call the net positive, so that all of your experiences work basically give you a more positive experience than anything detracting.
Fantastic. I mean, I've asked a lot of people the same question. It's just been really interesting to hear different experts' point of view, particularly through their experience and the knowledge that they have on their particular subjects. So look, on behalf of the Intact Beyond team, thank you very much for sharing your expertise today.
Excellent. Thank you so much for inviting me, Nicole. It's great. I look forward to learning from all the others too.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.